Greetings, Gilliam the Rogue here once again, back from my small hiatus, and I'm ready to pump out the content. Today we'll be starting with the Stamina Nightblade, but as always, I'd like to start this video off with a massive thank you to the people who support and enable me, allowing me to make this content and help more than I'd be able to. So I really appreciate all of the help, the discussion, the community that we build, and how much it's grown in the short amount of time that we've been together. So really massive shout out to you all. I'd only be a fraction of myself without you, so really thank you. But let's get into the video discussion, now with much more content for the solo and average player. Hope you enjoy. Today we are going to be updating the Stamina Nightblade for the Morrowind patch. A lot has changed with the game, but not a lot has changed too much with stamina builds. We will be talking about rotation changes, CP allocation a little bit more, as well as what we've done to our bars. Not much has changed, but we did have to take a different morph, and so on. But I'm just going to go over the gist of things, because a lot of what we talked about from the Homestead patch will apply to Morrowind in terms of choosing racials, gear, etc. So, as always, we'll start with race. What race is the best at the moment? Well, in Morrowind, resource management became very important, making Redguard extremely powerful. However, Redguard did get nerfed, so it's not as powerful as it used to be. So if you're someone who really struggles with resource management, you don't have access to a group giving you shards or orbs, and you're not very fluid with your rotation yet and getting in heavy attacks and understanding when you shouldn't be doing that, then Redguard is going to be your best friend. But if you're able to make really good choices on the fly and you understand the game really well, then Khajiit is still going to boast the most damage per second. So this is what I go with. I mean, I could go Redguard and still pull really crazy DPS. They're probably less than 1% away from each other in perfect situations. However, again, if you're having troubles with resource management, Redguard is definitely going to be stronger, probably 2 to 3% DPS overall, which can be quite a bit when we look at our higher numbers in AoE or raids. So pick wisely, and again, you can pick other stuff like Imperial. You're going to have pretty shoddy resource management, but you're going to be really tanky because of that extra health. Orc is a good choice, especially if you plan on PvPing a lot, because there's a lot of great racials in there, like improved health, stamina, speed, melee damage, healing, so that's really good. And then if you are 100% on board with resource management, then go with either Wood Elf or Argonian. And that sounds really weird to mention Argonian, but Argonian currently has the most resource management out of any race because of their potion passive. Whenever they drink a potion, they get a metric fuck ton of their magicka, stamina, and health back. And as a Nightblade, well, we'll be using potions a lot because of our siphoning of passives, so the Argonian Nightblade works really well. Are you going to be posting crazy DPS numbers? Not really, because you don't have max stamina or weapon critical or anything like that, but you will have resources, and you do more damage if you have resources than if you don't. So again, if you really struggle with resource management, you can pick that Argonian. But most of the times you're going to see Redguard or Khajiit be the #1 picks. Now for Mundus Stone. Mundus Stone is actually really interesting with the Nightblade because we have two options, and many people default to Thief because Thief is really strong for all DPS. Magicka, stamina does not matter because it just boasts so much critical, both spell and weapon. You get 11% base, and then with all divines you get 16.7% crit, which is insane in terms of DPS potential. So really important to go with that. However, the Nightblade has the most crit chance out of any class in the game thanks to passives, making our crit chance much higher, and meaning the closer and closer we get to 100% crit, the less and less value we get out of it, because we're going to be critting more than that already. It's something called diminishing returns. It doesn't exist too much in Elder Scrolls outside of CP. Crit chance doesn't necessarily have diminishing returns from a pumping points into it, but in terms of mathematical effectiveness, if I have 70% crit chance and I get 10% more, it's not going to be the same power spike that I would have gotten if I had 10% crit chance and gained that crit. So it will be a little diminished, and it will leave a lot of things up to chance. So crit chance really shines in long durations because the more accurate or the more tests you have, or the amount of hits, the closer you're going to get to that number you have. So if you have 90% crit but do 10 hits, well, you have a chance to do 70% or 100% because there's a lot of room for error or chance because you have a very small target. But if you have a large target where you're doing 100,000 hits, then you're going to be very close to your real crit chance. So crit chance really strong in long fights. Guess what? In Morrowind, a lot of fights are long now outside of like Maelstrom Arena and so on. So crit is really good. And if we've chosen the Khajiit, we have even more crit. We have insane amounts of crit. If I open up my character sheet without major savagery or anything, no thief stone, I have 60.9% crit. So if I drink my major savagery potion, and let's hit this guy and do a crit quick, I jump up to 74% crit chance without the Thief Mundus Stone, making the Shadow actually stronger than the Thief. Because if I had the Thief, then I'd be almost at 90% crit chance, and that would just be over the top. It would be unnecessary because I would be so close to 100% that I'd be better off with other stats. So getting critical hit damage or modifiers, because it will affect our healing, that makes it even more potent. So as a Khajiit Nightblade, you have an option. Do you want Thief for really, really high crit chance, or do you want Shadow for room for error, but if you have long fights, you're going to be doing astronomical damage because you're going to be really close to your listed crit chance, and your crits are just doing so much more. So I really like Shadow for Stamina Nightblade Khajiit, and that's pretty much the only place I use Shadow anymore. I've been doing a lot of testing with it back and forth. I like Shadow, or I like Thief for things like Maelstrom Arena or dungeons because it's very fast-paced. The fights don't last long. But for trials, Shadow is really, really strong. So those are your options there. As for consumables, we're going to have two options this patch. One of them is going to come with some interesting mechanics with it, but the tried and true max health stamina by stat food is probably your go-to. This is going to boast the most DPS in terms of if you have really good resource management, you're going to have enough health. I don't have so much because I am in 7 medium, but we'll talk about that when we get there. But this gives us tons of health. It really, really helps out. The other option is the Dubious Throne. Let me make some really quick. And that's going to help if you don't have a lot of resource management. So if you're having trouble sustaining your rotation, then this is going to be your best friend because it just offers so much. It's going to have stam recovery, stamina, and health. So let's just sip on this to demonstrate. But my health and stamina will decrease noticeably, but my stamina regen has also gone up. So the places where Dubious is really strong is places where sustain is immensely important. So fights that are just so long-winded, or there's so many things where you have to block or dodge, and your stamina pool becomes vital, then Dubious Throne is going to be really, really strong. Again, since we're going to be at like 15k health, obviously before Warhorn and Ebon, you will want to at least put one enchant or a few attribute points into health to get that up to about 17 to 18k health before Warhorn and Ebon. You want to be at about 20k health in raids these days just because there's so many high damaging mechanics if you're in veteran or hard mode. So I really suggest being near that 20k mark, and with Dubious Throne, you're obviously going to need to find a way to get that health up. Again, if you're an Imperial, that'll be a little bit easier, but you will be missing damage elsewhere. But yeah, you're able to make your own choices. So I usually go with buy health stat, or the buy health stamina food, because that's just what I'm used to. Dubious Throne is very helpful if you have sustain issues, but most of the times I'm not finding this to be an advantage to me because I'm pretty good at managing my resources, and we've made some accommodations to our kit and gear setups to kind of go into the favor of more resource management. Okay, so that was a lot of information talking about the basics, the what do I drink, and so on. I guess we'll talk about potions really quick. Potions, most of the time, as any stamina build these days, in endgame performance, you're going to want to use weapon power potions. You get that juicy brutality and savagery, and if you have your alchemy passives leveled up, with the medicinal use, they'll be able to last longer than their cooldown, meaning you'll have it infinitely, but you will have to drink them. They can get kind of expensive, but weapon power potions, luckily, are the cheapest endgame potions at the moment. So you can either make them. It takes Blessed Thistle, Dragon Thorn, and then Wormwood or Water Hyacinth. Those two can be interchanged, and you'll get the wonderful potions that we use. If you're not keen on spending money like that, just use them for places that are important, like raids or boss fights and something, and then just use junk stamina potions or anything you like. Just make sure it returns stamina, because again, resource management is really, really important this patch. So now let's go into abilities quick, or let's talk about gear next. So the one thing that we did change with our gear is now we're running 7 medium instead of 511. So instead of getting those nice Undaunted passives from Undaunted Metal, we will be losing that extra 4% or 6% health and then 4% stamina and magicka, so we will be less tanky. We're also going to lose about 1% damage mitigation from not having that heavy chest piece and stuff, but we're going to have way more resource management than before, because they reworked the class or the armor lines so that Windwalker and the light armor version give less, so it's more important to have more of it. So if you're really good at resource management, maybe if you're a red guard or you're running Dubious Throne, then I will suggest 511, just because you get so much more extra stats, especially from heavy armor. You get 2% health just from equipping one, and then you get another 2% from Undaunted Metal, so it's really efficient. And if you find yourself dying more, then you can do 6 medium, 1 heavy to make yourself a little bit tankier, get that extra 4% health, the 2% stamina and magicka. So there are options. Do what you like best, find what works best for you, sort of thing. But usually for me, I like 7 medium just because it helps our sustain so much more. And then it does give us that little bit of extra weapon crit, so losing 511 from a DPS perspective isn't the end of the world. It is a little bit less DPS, less than 1%, but it is still a loss. But still, resource management. If I'm out of stamina, I'm going to do less DPS. So 7 medium is my friend now. And then as for gear sets, nothing really changed with this in terms of what I'm running now, but there are options moving into the future. So I've written in the written guides the options if you're a beginner Nightblade. So usually if you're going to go with a crafted or BOE set, you're going to use something like Hunding's Rage as your main 5-piece, because that's going to offer a lot of flat stats instead of using percentages from Spriggans or Night Mothers, because flat amps are strong if you're not really good at the game yet. You're learning your rotation, things are new to you. So because it offers a flat level, you're going to always get that power. Meanwhile, things like percentages from penetration or critical offer a percent of what you're already doing. So if what you're doing is kind of low, then you're not going to get much efficiency out of those percentages. So go with the flat, which is 5-piece Hunting Range. You'll use that on your body. And then you can go 2 routes. If you have the Morrowind DLC, I really suggest the Infector set. You use it on your jewelry and then helmets. And then you can craft a 2-piece like Ashen Griff to get a little bit of health. And if you don't have the Morrowind DLC, then you can just use pretty much whatever, like 3-piece agility, and then craft a 4-piece, like 4-piece Ashen Grip, or if you have a monster set from doing dungeons, you can use those there. So you have options. And then moving in to more endgame without trials, then you're going to want to be using like 5 Night Mother's Gaze or Spriggans, depending on what you like. Spriggans is stronger in solo, Night Mother's is better in group, so choose what you more of what you play. And then 3-piece set, again, without trials, you're probably going to want either a 3-piece agility or you're going to want Leviathan, which gives a lot of crit. So you'd run that on jewelry and weapons, and then use like an Undaunted set like Krag's, Veladreth, or Celine's. But then for endgame, so if you're doing trials, you've cleared them quite a few times, then this is going to be your end bis gear. And this will change depending on your group composition and so on, but most groups these days don't run many stamina builds because they are harder to play, and their DPS potential is very dependent on how good you are. And as stamina is harder, it's harder to pull good DPS with them. So stamina builds, if you're in a group with a lot of them, it's going to change. But I'm just going to give the solo, or like if you're the only stamina build first, and our main 5-piece will be Twin Fang Snake. And Twin Fang Snake comes from Sanctum of Ophidia. You can do normal or vet, it doesn't matter. And you're going to want to get 3 jewelry pieces and 2 body pieces. This ensures it's up 100% of the time, because it procs from every bit of damage and it increases your penetration. So even if some guy off in Buckfuckville is not getting hit, if you go hit him, since it's increasing your penetration, you're still going to get that bonus damage. Meanwhile, things like Night Mother's Gaze reduce their resistances, so if he's off over there and I hit him, he's not getting that penetration value until I apply it to him. So that's why Twin Fang is really good. It works for everything. It's up 100% of the time as long as we're doing our rotation. It's very, very powerful. Then we're going to be using a 2-piece monster set. This depends, again, on what you like. So if you're doing a lot of cleave DPS, then Veladreth is going to be strong because the 2-piece bonus is just going to hit all the targets much better than Krag's because it has a larger AoE radius. It's going to go off in like a trident sort of thing, so it's really helpful. Otherwise, 2-piece Krag's is really strong and versatile. The 2-piece bonus from Krag's is only really for single target DPS or when enemies are so close together that you're able to hit, but the proc chance or the proc range is really, really tiny, so don't worry about that. But the 1 piece does offer a lot of armor penetration or physical penetration, which increases your damage with physical, disease, and poison damage, and as a Stam build, that's all we're doing pretty much. So that's helpful, but again, if I'm in a raid with other stamina builds and we have access to powerful sets like Night Mother's Gaze or Sunderflame, then that becomes useless, and Veladreth again takes up the front. So be aware, what are your group mates running? Are you running with stamina builds? So if I'm in a group with stamina builds, instead of everyone having run Twin Fang Snake, I'm going to say, hey, I'll run Night Mother's Gaze, and then you can run Sunderflame or Allocations or something else, and then we'll both help each other at a less loss. So since we're double dipping into each other's set bonuses, it's like we're wearing an additional 5-piece because we're working together. So that operational DPS or enabling DPS comes together to provide a higher ceiling in terms of what you're capable of. Otherwise, again, if you're solo, Twin Fang Snake going to be your best friend. But if you're in a group with other stamina builds, then you can run Allocations, which is very powerful, especially since tanks don't run it anymore. You can run Night Mother's Gaze, which is tried and true, one of my favorite sets in the game from group utility and solo. And then you can also run Sunderflame. If you're more of a heavy attack person, then Sunderflame is going to be really, really strong. So those are your options for that. And then the other pieces that we're going to be running is 2 options. You're going to have room for 3 pieces on your body. I devote this to either Vicious Ophidian or Allocations. If I'm running Allocations already, I do not need that 3-piece to go to Vicious Ophidian because the main thing I'm looking for is Minor Slayer. So if I have Allocations, I already have Minor Slayer, so I don't need it. So you can fill that in with something else. But since usually I'm running 2 Fang, then I'm going to run 3-piece Vicious on the body, so I permanently have that Minor Slayer. And then on my dual wield bar, I'm going to run 2 Vicious Daggers ideally. I have a sword and a dagger. Sharpened is still probably going to be your best bet. Again, if you're in a really good group capable of reducing resistances, you have things like Allocations or Night Mothers, and you have Krag's, then you can run 2 Precise or 1 Precise, 1 Sharpened. You're very flexible in terms of what you're able to do. And especially with the champion point system rework, it's not the end of the world if you don't have Sharpened. Sharpened is still best in slot for most content because your allies are just, it's going to be really hard to keep things like Allocations up 100%. You're not going to have all of these crazy utility buffs, so Sharpened is still usually going to be the best end-all be-all. But again, you have options now that they reworked CP diminishing returns. It's less of a loss to have points spent into piercing and have a precise. Now, a lot of people think that it's actually better to do that. That's completely incorrect. You lose so many operational points from spending those 58 or 60 points in the piercing node than if you would have spent them somewhere else. Because if you do that, you're getting roughly 7% damage from penetration versus losing 11 or 12% from the other nodes that you're devoting it to. So it's not the best, but it is an option. It helps lower the gap between the power of Sharpened and Precise. So I'm glad to see Sharpened kind of retract from just this super OP thing. But again, Sharpened is still BIS. So that's going to be your go-to. But again, if you have Precise, spend a little points into piercing, or if you're running with Sunderflame and Night Mothers, you're in the gold. So that's going to be our other 5-piece. This is only going to be active on our dual wield bar, so you have to be conscious. If you're running out of stamina and you're running into a group of enemies, make sure you're on your dual wield bar to get that juicy stamina back. It has a 1-second ICD, and the other really nice thing is even if you're not killing enemies, you get 8% cost reduction. This is the main reason I run this set, is because 8% cost reduction is absurd. That's like wearing 4 pieces of additional medium armor. So it's really, really powerful. If you are really, really somehow capable of managing resources beyond God's belief, then you can run 2 VMA daggers here instead. Ideally, again, sharpened or precise, and then change your CP depending on what you have. But most of the time, 5-piece vicious is going to be the best, because the Maelstrom rotation is very, very demanding. It's very fast-paced. It's fluid. It requires you to do the same abilities over and over again. And now that resource management is this new mechanic in DPS, you're going to have to stop the heavy attack. You're going to have to stop to synergize more. So the Maelstrom rotation becomes less of a possible accomplishment, because I can't complete those same 5 or 6 actions in a row when I have to heavy attack or synergize to get my stamina back. So the Maelstrom rotation has kind of dropped in importance. It's still very good if you're capable of doing that, but again, that's only if you're like a Red Guard, running Dubious Throne, all these other things, and those have their own DPS losses associated with them that isn't really worth it. So I usually just go with 5-piece vicious. It's what I like. It's what I've gotten the most DPS with in terms of target dummies and stuff, but I'm not saying that it's the best. There is the potential for Maelstrom daggers to win. It's just very, very niche in where it's powerful. So if you don't have them, don't sweat it. Don't feel like it's the end of the world. You're not losing that much DPS anymore. And then, of course, the Maelstrom bow. This thing offers us so much DPS. It's probably the most important thing to get. So if you're new to the stamina class, then I really, really suggest just grinding out Maelstrom. I know it sucks. Maybe just do it on a magic attune or something, but get that bow. It could be precise. It could be sharpened. Again, sharpened will be preferred, but it's not the end of the world, but as long as it's sharpened or precise. And again, if it's defending or something, it's not going to be the end of the world, but most of the times you're going to want it to be sharpened, because the reason is single target dots that you apply on your bar now retain with the stats that you cast them with. So if I cast this on my bow bar and swap to my dual wield, yes, my dual wield has sharpened, but if I have a single target ability, which Poison Injection, a single target damage over time ability, is, it's going to look at the stats that I casted with. So if my bar is infused, then it's going to say, oh, hey, he doesn't have sharpened, so that Poison Injection is going to be much weaker, even though I'm swapping. So that's why sharpened is still best on your back bar, but again, it's not the end of the world. That's like super fine-tuned mathematics. So if you're not really into min-maxing, just make sure you have a Maelstrom bow. The most important part is buffing the shit out of that Endless Hail. It's so much DPS. It's like 7 to 8k single target. It's almost as powerful as things like Liquid Lightning or Wall of Elements. So it's really, really important that you get that. It sucks to grind Maelstrom, but it's totally worth it. So that covers pretty much everything from gear. We talked, again, if you're confused about it, go to the written site. I'll have it in the link in the description. You can look through the beginner stuff, the intermediary, and the end game. So now that we're done with that, let's talk about abilities. So most of the time, we're not going to be fighting single target, so we're going to be running something called Steel Tornado. This is our best AoE in the game for a stamina build. It does a lot of damage. It has a built-in execute from itself and the dual wield skill line. It's just amazing. It hits a lot of targets, and if you're using Vicious Ophidian, you'll be proccing it like crazy, because Steel Tornado is going to be killing a lot of things. So very, very strong. Next ability is Relentless Focus, and Relentless Focus got changed a little bit. Instead of having to recast it after 4 light attacks and activating the Spectral Bow, now it needs 5 light attacks to activate the Spectral Bow, but after you activate it, you can activate it again after another 5 light attacks. So if you only do Relentless Focus and light attack, that means you can get 4 Spectral Bows off. However, that's not possible with a robust DPS rotation, because we're not going to have those 5 seconds available to us, because sometimes we're going to be applying dots. Sometimes we're going to be doing heavy attacks. So usually you get about 2 to 3 procs out of this per Relentless cast, which is still really strong. but it's not perfect. I would really love to see the duration go up, but whatever. Relentless Focus is our best friend now. Before it was not worth casting, now it is totally worth casting, and it is very important to land those medium or those light and heavy attack weaves. So that's really, really important, and it's going to be why the Stamina Nightblade is one of the harder classes to play, because you're really, really punished for missing those weaves. So if you're not super good at it yet, just test, experiment, practice. Just sit on a dummy for hours doing your rotation, trying to get in all those weaves, figure out when it's optimal, when it's not, what works for you, sort of thing. But yeah, Relentless Focus, great. Minor Berserk, Endurance, tons of damage from the proc, really, really strong. Next is our spammable. We're going to have two options here. If we are a solo player, Surprise Attack is our go-to. It gives us 3% health for slotting. It applies Major Fracture, increasing or decreasing the enemy's resistances by 10.56%. Really, really powerful. It enables a lot of DPS if we're alone. It's easy to weave. It does really nice damage. And again, passive slots for having it. So amazing, amazing, amazing. But if we're in a group with like a tank and he's using Pierce Armor, which if you're a tank, you should always be doing that, that Major Fracture is already going to be applied. So Surprise Attack loses out in efficiency, and Rapid Strikes then takes the win. Because Rapid Strikes just does so much damage because it's considered a dot. And yes, now that we have Master at Arms, Surprise Attack did get stronger, and the gap between Rapid Strikes and Surprise Attacks lessened, but so much of our damage is already dots that it's more efficient to spend points into Thaumaturge, so Rapid Strikes just wins again. And even without CP, Rapid Strikes is about 2k DPS ahead of Surprise Attack if Major Fracture is applied. Again, if it's not, if you're alone or your tank is being a monkey and only using Inner Rage and Frost heavy attacks and there's no Major Fracture, then Surprise Attack is going to win. But most of the times the Fracture will be applied if you're in a group, so go with Rapid Strikes. It's still very easy to weave. It actually costs less stamina. The cost is less, again, than Surprise Attack because of dual wield feats and so on. But again, since it has a 0.6 second channel time, that means I'm not able to do other actions in the meantime, so it saves me sustain because it's allowing my resources, my resource or stamina regeneration to tick every 2 seconds. So if I'm doing 3 or 4 Rapid Strikes, then I'm getting those 2 ticks out of it, whereas Surprise Attack, I would be doing other actions in the meantime. So it does have that pseudo resource management in form of operational value. Otherwise, very easy to use, very, very powerful. If you need healing, you can take the Bloodthirst morph. Again, if Major Fracture is applied, you'll do a little bit less DPS. You'll lose 15% damage overall with Rapid Strikes alone. You won't lose 15% DPS across the board just from Rapid Strikes, but you'll gain a lot of healing. And staying alive means you're not dead, and being not dead means you're doing DPS. A dead DPS does no DPS. You've heard it before. So Bloodthirst if you need that. Otherwise, Rapid Strikes and Surprise Attack. Next is our Execute. Very easy to use. Only cast this on a target that's at or below 25% health. There is no advantage to casting this above that HP threshold. It does really mediocre damage until that Execute kicks in. The really nice thing about Killer's Blade is it's going to cost less than our spammable, it's going to be easier to weave, and if we're in like solo or a small group like dungeons and we're able to kill a mob, it's going to give us a little bit of health back if they die within 2 seconds of casting it on them. So it does have a little bit there. It's very powerful in terms of an Execute. It's not the best Execute, but it's still much better than our spammable. If we're using Rapid Strikes with the VMA rotation, don't sweat Killer's Blade too much because Rapid Strikes has a built-in Execute. So does Twin Slashes and all of our dual wield abilities. So it's not the end of the world if you're not able to squeeze this in as frequently because the Maelstrom rotation is very difficult. Again, that's why I prefer the non-Maelstrom rotation, because I'm able to interchange between my spammable and Killer's Blade at that Execute instead of being forced to commit to the same actions over and over. Next ability is our Flex Spot, and this will be a defensive slot because, again, dead DPS does no DPS, and this game is very punishing to stamina builds. You're always in melee range, you're subjected to tons of mechanics, it's very difficult. So you're going to go with one of two options. The preferred option is Deadly Cloak. This got reworked to apply or to grant 25% AoE damage reduction instead of 20%, and now all boss mechanics, not trash, but all boss mechanics are considered AoE, meaning you gain 25% damage mitigation when fighting a boss, which is super helpful. It allows the stamina build to contend and not instantly die anymore. I mean, obviously as a DPS, if you're standing in red, you're going to die sort of thing, but it helps us get out of those or be able to take a little bit more punishment than before. So very helpful. It's also worth keeping up 100% of the time as a damage source because it does do really nice damage with the Deadly Cloak morph. Alright, and then our other option is if we're not able to slot it and we just really need healing. So if we're solo or something, then we're going to put Resolving Vigor there. Resolving Vigor, it did get a cost increase. Do not spam this. It's a heal over time anyways. You shouldn't be spamming it, but it heals us. It heals 5 other allies. It's very strong in terms of healing capabilities. But it's not going to save you from a one-shot mechanic as opposed to Blade Cloak. So Blade Cloak will prevent those nasty high burst situations, while Vigor will help you take smaller but larger income sources of damage. So if I have 10 people hitting me, Blade Cloak is going to give me 25% damage reduction if they're all bosses, which most of the times they won't. But Vigor, on the other hand, is just going to give me a flood of healing so I can keep taking that extra damage, and it's not that big of a deal. Okay, so usually you're going to be running Blade Cloak instead of Vigor, but again, you have options. Then for our ultimate ability, and this is where things really open up. So if we're in a single target boss fight and we're doing the Maelstrom rotation, or we just really want to make sure we're tanky, then we're going to slot Rend, because Rend lasts a long time, it doesn't cost too much, it does nice damage, and it heals us immensely. 50% of the damage done. If we crit, that means 50% of that crit becomes a heal. That heal can crit. It's amazing. Rend is really strong. So if you really can't stay alive, or there's just so many adds that are nice and piled up, then Rend is your best friend, because you're doing lots of damage, because it is a like a conal almost. It's like a size of Twisting Path or Refreshing Path, and then it does the nice damage and the healing. So great. But a lot of times that's not going to be the situation. Mobs are going to be littered out all over the place, and you have two options here. If you're the more passive player, then you're going to slot Flawless or Dawnbreaker of Smiting. This gives us a 3%, or if we have Flawless, 8% additional weapon damage. It helps boost up our passive DPS really nicely. However, I don't like this. I'm more of the active player, so I use Soul Harvest on my bar. This gives me 2% crit, which again, very strong. It gives us the opportunity to, when an enemy is in execute, instead of saving up for that big amount of ultimate, we can just cast it for 70, get 20% additional damage against them for 6 seconds, and deal some minor damage. But the main reason we use Soul Harvest instead of incapacitating strikes is for the 10 ultimate when we get a killing blow. Yes, we're not going to kill everything in the game, especially in groups, but you're still going to kill stuff, because there are going to be times when you're paying more attention or you're doing more damage. I mean, we have tons of built-in executes, so you're getting the killing blow. So you're getting that 10 ultimate. It has no cooldown. So I'm able to cast other ultimates at a much higher pace than another class because of Soul Harvest. That's why I take Soul Harvest. I use it for trash fights. I use it for boss fights with lots of adds. All the time. It's really strong. So most of the time on trash, have Soul Harvest here. Again, if you're not confident in your ability to land killing blows, then use Flawless Dawnbreaker. But most DPS comes from Soul Harvest, and it comes from being versatile. Yeah, you can get that 8% weapon damage all the time, but you're losing a lot of power from not having that ultimate, not having that crit. So a versatile player is able to realize that and say, hey, Soul Harvest has more uses than Flawless Dawnbreaker, so I'm going to take that, and it's going to make me better suited to all sorts of combat advantages. Instead of saying, oh, hey, tonight we're going in here, I got to respec. Oh, we're moving somewhere else, I got to respec. Soul Harvest, no, I put it on, it's great anywhere. And then our last option So those are the 3 options. Soul Harvest, my go-to. Rend if we're doing a boss fight with not a lot of adds and we need that healing. Otherwise, Flawless Dawnbreaker if we want that sustained. Now we'll go to our back bar. First slot, Rearming Trap. Really straightforward. Minor Force for 12 seconds. Does really nice damage. Easy to use. Always start a boss fight or just fight in general with placing this on them. That's the first thing you do is you run in, you place that, and then you start your rotation. It's really easy, but you want to make sure that Minor Force is up 100% of the time. Next ability, Poison Injection. Again, very easy to use. You cast it on a dude, does nice damage. After 50% health, this is extremely important to keep up because it's going to do execute damage. It's worth keeping it up 100% of the time, but at 50%, it becomes a mandatory must. You cannot miss this ability because it does so much. Next is Endless Hail. Another very important. This should be up 100% of the time because it offers us more DPS than any ability in our kit, in single target and in AoE. Since it has AoE potential, that makes it even more important to keep up. It's easy to use, it has a 10-second duration, it can be casted super far away, so it's really easy to use. Usually what you're going to do is as soon as you swap to your back bar when doing your rotation, you're going to Trap Beast, press Endless Hail, and that reticle is going to pop up while I'm doing my animation. So it's going to go off the millisecond it is possible for the game to calculate. Hey, your global cooldown is done. Now I'm going to do that Endless Hail instead of having to sit there and rely on human error. All right, is my global cooldown done? Can I do this? So always do Trap Beast, Endless Hail. Really easy, really just keep that muscle memory. So very important, especially if you have the Maelstrom Bow. Amazing. Next ability can be treated as a flex spot. Again, if we're a DPS and we want to stay alive, then gaining DPS is important, but staying alive is even more important. So if I have not entered Cyrodiil or I'm not confident in my abilities to sustain my resources, then I'm going to take Caltrops off. And I'm going to have Deadly Cloak on my front bar, and then I'm going to run Vigor on my back bar. Otherwise, I can use things like Mirage. This gives us a little bit of dodge chance. It gives us 2% crit when we're on this bar. It enables our Hemorrhage passive, but it's not the end of the world to have an assassination ability slotted back here. The other option we can do is from the Undaunted skill, we can use Spike Bone Shield. It gives us 30% of our max health as a shield. If our allies synergize it, they get a 60% shield, so some group utility. Pretty straightforward, but most of the times as a DPS player, myself included, I'm going to be using Razor Caltrops. It got reworked that everyone using this skill can gain benefit, so it no longer has a one-person cap. Everyone can use it. It costs a lot of stamina though, and it lasts 12 seconds. Since it lasts 12 seconds, that will fit in perfectly with our rotation, because when we come on our back bar, we're going to do Trap Beast, Endless Hail. That's 1 second when both of those are activating, because Trap Beast has a 1.5 second delay, Endless Hail has a 1 second or 1.5 second trajectory before it lands and begins its effect. So you combine those, and then it starts dealing damage after a 1 second. So it takes 3 seconds to start both of them, but if you do Rearming Trap and Endless Hail together, they'll immediately do damage at the same time. So that's why I consider it 1 second. Then we're going to do a Poison Injection, so that's 2 seconds. So now 10 seconds have passed if I'm on my back bar swapping Trap Beast, Endless Hail, Poison Injection. It is now 12 out of 12. Guess what? Razor Caltrops last 12 seconds. I'm going to throw that, refresh it. Perfect. Everything lines up really well with this rotation when we're running that. It's going to do great single target. It's going to do great AoE damage. But again, that really high cost is going to make it very difficult to keep up 100% of the time. So if you're not confident, don't worry about it. Staying alive is more important, or keeping your resources is more important. So still, very strong skill, worth keeping up and execute. Last ability is Leeching Strikes, and we need this ability to sustain. It did get shit on. It's piss poor compared to what Siphoning Attacks used to be. No more infinite sustain, but it's still very important to keep up. So 20% or 20 second duration, meaning most of the time our rotation will be 10 to 12 seconds, so you'll want to cast this once every 2 bar swaps. Otherwise, if you want to keep up this 100% of the time, you can cast it whenever you're on this bar. So if I did my rotation on my front bar and it's time to reapply my dots, I can recast this because they added something that it's not the end of the world. When it's active, you're going to heal and gain 106 stamina on light and heavy attacks. It's pretty straightforward. The stamina return is poop. Like 106 stamina is nothing. But the health is nice, especially if you're solo. It's going to give us a much needed healing. And then after the duration, it's going to explode and you're going to get 4270 stamina if it went the full 20 seconds. However, the way this ability works is that extra explosion will go off after the duration. So like if I recast this after 10 seconds, I'm going to get half of that 4270 stamina back. So I will still gain stamina back. It's not the end of the world if you recast this early now, which is really great. So again, if you want to keep up that healing and stamina back on light and heavy attacks 100% of the time, then cast this whenever you're on your back bar. Do your rotation, Trap Beast, Endless Hail, Poison Injection, Caltrops, Leeching Strikes, bar swap. We'll see in the rotation segments, pretty straightforward, but Leeching Strikes, very important to use. It'll give us 2 ultimate whenever we cast it because we're not using siphoning abilities much. Pretty straightforward. Last is our ultimate slot, and our ultimate slot is dependent on what we did. So if we went with Rend on our front bar, then we're going to do Soul Harvest back bar because, again, once an enemy is at low health, we're going to get that ultimate return, or we're going to get that extra 20% damage and that little bit of damage dealt with it. So if we're in Execute and I don't have time to throw off another Rend, I'm going to use Soul Harvest. It's going to give me that extra damage. Then if I did Soul Harvest front bar, then I'm going to do either Ballista if I'm doing pure single target, so the bow skill line. Ballista, really, really strong for pure single target DPS application. Always cast this after you've buffed up your Hawkeye passive from doing light attacks. So if I'm sitting at 175 ultimate when I bar swap, and I haven't done Trap Beast, Endless Hail, I'm not going to cast Ballista yet. I'm going to do Trap Beast, Endless Hail, Poison Injection, Caltrops, and then Ballista, because then I'm going to have that 25% additional damage, or 20% additional damage from the Hawkeye passives, because I got 1, 2, 3, 4 light attacks off in that duration if I did all of them. Otherwise, you'll get 15%, because sometimes you're not going to weave in between Rearming Trap and Endless Hail. So I would go to back bar, light attack, Trap Beast, Endless Hail, light attack, Poison Injection, light attack, Caltrops. So 15% damage from Hawkeye, which would apply to Ballista even after I swap up. Very important to do. Otherwise, if we are not doing pure single target damage and we're doing like a trash fight where there's just tons and tons of mobs, if they're Daedra, Dawnbreaker of Smiting, really strong, does bonus damage to Daedra Undead, very simple to use, does pretty high burst damage, has a 5-second dot. Really, really nice. Otherwise, if we're just fighting tons and tons of enemies, we're going to have Soul Harvest on our front bar to get that really nice ultimate. And then we're going to put Shooting Star here. And yes, Shooting Star deals fire damage. It's not going to scale with us exceptionally well compared to a Magicka build, because it does flame damage, so no CP scaling. But it'll still scale with our weapon and weapon damage and stamina. And it's going to be really strong in the form of ultimate, because anytime you hit one enemy, you gain 12 ultimate, up to 6 targets. So a total of 72 ultimate if this lands on all 6. Then if you're getting killing blows, that's another 10 ultimate. If they're undead and Daedra, that's another 9 ultimate from our Fighters Guild passive, Banish the Wicked. If we're drinking potions off cooldown, we're getting 20 ultimate. So there's not, the Nightblade boasts crazy ultimate regeneration. So if you're fighting lots of enemies, Shooting Star, back bar with Soul Harvest front bar. Very, very powerful. You're going to be throwing off more ultimates than anyone in the game, which is why Soul Harvest is so strong. Okay, so we talked about all the abilities, we talked about all the gear, we talked about what you want to do as a solo player, what you want to do between if you're not really confident in your abilities. So we've covered pretty much everything. Now let's start doing rotations. We're going to do the mini dummy because I just want to give a demonstration. I don't want to do a DPS test because I'm not here to flex the EP, and I'm just here to demonstrate what the rotation needs to look like. So we're going to do the standard rotation first. So we're going to do solo player because no one's applying any buffs for me. I'm going to make sure my blade cloak is there. Since we're doing pure single target, I'm going to do soul harvest front bar and then ballista back bar. Again, if I was trying to inflate my numbers and get that juicy good parse to show off to my friends, I would want flawless Dawnbreaker there. However, I don't want to morph every time I'm trying to show off, so I'm just going to keep soul harvest on 100% of the time. Going to give me that crit, going to give me that cast, and so on. Very, very nice. And then since I'm doing a single target fight, I'm going to take off Steel Tornado and I'm going to put on Rending Slashes. That was the one thing I forgot to mention. If you're in a single target or a boss fight with very, very low ad counts, then we're going to do Rending Slashes. It's going to be so strong. It's very helpful. The reason we take this over Blood Craze is because the initial hit damage is amplified. The initial hit hits twice and it can crit, meaning that 300 tooltip you gain becomes closer to 2k after buffs, crits, etc. So it's very, very powerful. And that 2k then becomes 4k because it hits twice. You go doo-doom. So that's why we take Rending Slashes over Blood Craze. But okay, let's do the rotation now. So this is, again, this isn't going to be 100% accurate of what we're capable of doing as a damage dealer in terms of, like, I'm not doing this to show off. I'm just trying to show the rotation. So I'm going to record, overlay voice over it, talking about it so you don't hear the keyboard mash and so on. And then we'll talk a little bit more about what would change in a large environment or changing, like if we took off surprise attack and did rapid strikes or something. So let's begin. So as always, we're going to buff up, drink our potion, blade cloak, relentless siphoning, and then go in with the trap beast, endless hail, light attack poison injection, light attack caltrops, and then drop our ballista. Then we're going to go into applying rending slashes and go into spam mode, activating the spectral bow whenever we can. Going to squeeze in heavy attacks whenever I can that doesn't incur a large DPS loss, so my stamina pool remains robust. Pretty much after that, it's just rinse, repeat, watching my buffs and so on. So I usually get about 2 to 3 surprise attacks off, maybe more depending on how fast I am, before I need to go back and reapply that Trap Beast, Endless Hail, Poison Injection. But you see, the rotation is pretty straightforward, and it follows a pretty general rule. Okay, are my buffs up? Are my dots down? All right, let's go to it. Go into spam mode. All right, my dots are coming off. I need to go reapply them. You'll also notice that I sometimes go back and reapply Trap Beast and Endless Hail before they're done. That's so that they reactivate the second that they're done, and I try and get as little downtime as possible, because if I wait for them to fade before I reapply them, then I have a 1 or 2 second window where I'm doing no damage with them. So it's better to reapply them as they're falling off instead of as they fall off. So that was it. I forgot to do my Killer's Blade, but let's talk about it. Okay, so that was a demonstration. I didn't do my execute, so at 25%, that's the important part, to start doing Killer's Blade instead of surprise attack. Again, if you're solo, that major fracture is really important. So if you're in execute mode, just make sure major fracture is still applied. So if it's about to run off, hit that surprise attack instead of keep doing Killer's Blade. Okay, so now I'm going to do the Rapid Strikes rotation. Keep in mind that I will not have major fracture, so my DPS will look much weaker than the surprise attack build. And then I will try and do the Killer's Blade in the rotation instead of completely zoning out. So let's begin. And again, like always, drink our potion, blade cloak, relentless, siphoning, go in with our rearming trap, endless, weave that poison injection and caltrops, drop our ultimate, apply rending, and now we're going to go into spam mode with rapid strikes instead of surprise attack. But we're also going to have to make sure that we get off our weaves properly, because remember that rapid strikes has that channel time to it. So I'm going to make a lot of mistakes with it because I'm not used to that channel time throwing off the sync of how quick I can get off light attack. So I'm not going to get as many relentless procs off. So my DPS is going to look much worse than it should be. So in this rotation, you have to be very conscious. Okay, my Rapid Strikes has a slight delay to it because it has that 0.6 seconds, so I shouldn't just be pressing my button in a rhythm. You have to watch it. All right, is my Spectral Bow ready? Did I land all 5 light attacks, or do I need to wait? With this build, though, or with this rotation, I don't have to do as many heavy attacks early on, but as the fight goes on, I do need to, because I do have that delay where I'm slowly draining instead of able to substitute a heavy attack or a surprise attack with a heavy attack. So it does kind of have that snowball effect where if you make a mistake early, it gets harder, making the Rapid Strikes rotation much more difficult, but the DPS reward is great. So if I had someone applying Major Fracture, we would see. And you'll notice through the execute that I do keep my buffs up 100% of the time, because that is very important. But now let's talk about it. Okay, so there was the Rapid Strikes rotation. We did notice that Relentless Focus was much harder to keep up than with the Surprise Attack rotation, because I'm committed to those extra 0.6 second channel times instead of being instant cast. So I get less weaves in, so you do lose a little bit of burst damage there. So again, in burst situations, Surprise Attack is going to win, even if Major Fracture is applied, because we're able to commit our rotation much quicker and much smoother. So for the average player, Surprise Attack is probably going to be your go-to. It gives extra health and mitigation, because whenever you apply it, you get Major Ward and Resolve. So you become really tanky. You gain that extra health. It's easy to use. It applies Fracture. It does a lot. So Surprise Attack is really strong for the average person. But if you're trying to push out as much DPS as possible, you have access to group utility in the form of Fracture and stuff, and you're very good at being able to adapt to a different rotation, then Rapid Strikes will perform better. Again, the DPS parses don't show it because I'm missing Major Fracture. That's over 10% DPS missing, even though I'm only not even 6,000, 5,000 DPS off. So I would gain much more if I had that, because the way Major Fracture works is that the enemy takes 10.56% less damage. That doesn't mean I gain that. It depends on how hard I hit. So if I hit with a really weak ability, I'm not gaining that much. But if I hit with a really hard ability like my ultimate or something, then I'm missing out on a lot of damage. So I'd be much closer to 40k or above 40k if I had that Major Fracture applied. So I did make mistakes in the rotation, but hopefully it gave you a general idea. All right, where am I using these abilities, weaving Surprise Attack in and stuff? And you notice that Rending Slashes kind of misses off on 1 second. Sometimes you do have to bar swap because you have like 1 second left of Relentless Focus before you can get that Spectral Bow. So you need to bar swap, hit it, and then go back to apply Caltrops or Siphoning Attacks or Leeching Strikes or something of the sort. So the Nightblade rotation is much more difficult than it was before because that changed to Relentless Focus, but it also means that we're capable of doing more DPS. While we won't be pulling DPS like we used to be because of the nerfs to some of our abilities, to resource management and so on, we're still able to come ahead of some other classes because of this change. Now, where do we fall in the meta at the moment? It's still kind of up in the air. The Stamina Nightblade is in a much better spot than it was before, thanks to that Relentless Focus change. Bringing in that Master at Arms passive really helped them with their execute damage and stuff. So the Nightblade isn't the worst DPS anymore. You're not going to be laughed at as hard when you try and go into a raid with it, but you're still going to need to be very efficient at the class. You're going to have to understand it, and you're going to have to be versatile, changing your bars a lot. You're going to have to come in with the idea that you need to not just have this static bar slot. And keep in mind that things like Soul Harvest, yeah, I lose that 8% weapon damage, so I can't cheese this boss or this skeleton dummy as easily as someone else, but at the same time, when I go into a raid, my performance is so much higher than them, and I'm able to pull better DPS or bring more group utility because of it. So don't just stare at the numbers on the DPS dummy. I mean, he has no mechanics. He's sitting there. It's a perfect controlled environment. You can even have allies apply stuff to him. Using a target dummy is a guideline. It helps you get better at your rotation, but do not ever use it as a basis of how good you are as a player, because the second you go into hard mode Rakat and he starts doing stuff you've never seen before because you're just used to hitting a dummy, well, then you're going to be useless. So use him as a guideline. Use him as a tool. Don't use him as an EP flexor, because who cares what you can do on a 0 mechanic sitting still, allies applying stuff to him? Sure, it shows potential, but that potential is meaningless because you're never going to be able to apply it. What boss sits still for 2 fucking minutes doing no mechanics where you just get to sit there and DPS? None. So DPS dummy, not an end-all be-all representation. In raids, the Nightblade does have a lot of powerful tools that help get rid of those really punishing mechanics. We now have healing. We have resource management. We have ultimate generation. So when we start getting into those really messy situations where a boss is doing tons of mechanics, the Nightblade is better at tackling them than, say, a Dragonite who just sits there and is like, oh, I'm a Magic Dragonite. I don't have utility because I'm pure DPS. So we have ways to remedy those situations where the fight is getting really, really against us. But again, Stamina Nightblade still not the best, still not posting insane numbers, but we're in a much better spot, and you should be able to feel free to play it once you are comfortable enough to perform to the letter, getting out that DPS, bringing the utility, understanding those mechanics. Now we're going to talk a little bit about CP, how it changes, and then that'll be the finishing note. So let's open up CP. Our green and red tree is going to stay identical no matter what. Red tree, 61 Ironclad, 1 medium armor focus. Why do we have this one here? Because after applying all of our points, we only have 1 point left over. And all CP nodes have jump points now. And what that means is if they are not on a full integer, they're useless. So Ironclad has 21.18% damage reduction. Well, that 0.18% is not on a whole integer, so it's useless to me. The game rounds down. It says, oh, this is useless. So if I had that 1 medium armor focus, it would say 21.37. Oh, 0.37 isn't a full integer. I'm going to throw it out the window. So what you want to do is get as close as possible to that whole integer, and then spend your points elsewhere. Because if I was at 0.2 or 20.98, it would be like, hey, you're not at a full integer. I'm going to round down to 20. So that's why we have to put in that extra point. But now all of our ability, or thick-skinned, I go down, I lose 1%. Thick, hardy, and Ellie, I lose 1%. Elemental, expert defender, lose 1%. Quick recovery. So we just have that one free point. You can put it wherever. I just take the extra mitigation from physical resistance. It's really whatever. 61 Ironclad, 1 medium armor focused or free floating point. 49 hardy and elemental defender. This gives us a really nice 11% damage reduction against all attacks. Thick skin gives us a 12% mitigation against dots. So if it is a physical dot, we're going to gain 23% damage mitigation. Or if it's a Flame Frost magic, it's going to be a 33%. And then if it's direct damage, we're going to get a whopping 21% plus the Hardy and Elemental Defender. So we're going to get way more mitigation than we had in the past with the CP changes. So that's really, really good. And most PvE damage is considered direct damage because AoEs are considered direct damage. A lot of mechanics are AoE. The only place where dots are really, really prevalent are Sanctum Ophidia, so you might want to pump up thick-skinned a little bit just because there's so many dots in there. So do that, but otherwise then the other points are 11 into Expert Defender. This reduces damage from light and heavy attacks. Guess what? Mobs, their basic attacks, they're considered light and heavy, so you put those in there and it makes you tankier when your tank isn't able to get aggro on everything. Obviously this is not going to save you from the Serpent smacking you in the face with his sword, but at the same time, when you have like overchargers light attacking you, or the Menders in Sanctum Ophidia doing their heavy attack, that will all be reduced, so it really, really gives a little bit of extra tankiness. And then 11 in the quick recovery, this just makes us take 3% additional healing from ourselves and our allies. You can use this 11 points elsewhere if you don't really like it. I like to go in between solo and group performance, so I like that extra 3% healing. But again, in a raid, you'd probably be better off with flat mitigation, so you can put those points elsewhere. Just remember, make sure you are on or as close to a full integer as possible in the CP system now. Okay, and then onto the Thief, we have 5 into Warlord. This reduces the cost of break free. Remember, since we have to make sure we're on a jump point, so our closest one is 5. And then I have another 5 into Tumbling. Same idea, you need to be on a jump point. The reason I don't put into Shadow Ward is because 1 only gets me 0.5. and it's only possible if you spend 5 points. So we have 10 free points. I spend 5 points in each of them. And then our other ones are 100 into Mooncalf. This gives us 15% stamina recovery, and then 100 into Tenacity, which gives us an additional 15% Magicka or stamina on our fully charged heavy attacks. What this means is currently, or previous to Morrowind, the base resource return was 5% Magicka or stamina back. That has increased to 30%. So let's open up our calculator. Just take 0.05. Multiply that by 1.3% because it's 100% of the original, so 130%. That becomes 6.5% resource return on our fully charged heavy attacks. Now we gain an additional 15%. So we go back and we take that multiplied by 1.15 because the 0.065 is the original. Now, if we had two different sources and the base was still 5% and then we had 30%, we would have to multiply 0.5 times 0.3 parentheses plus 0.5, which is the original, plus 0.5 times 0.15 in parentheses, and these would operate as separate entities and only go to the base. But the fact of the matter is, now that has changed, that original 0.5 or 5% has gone to 6.5% because it got a 30% boost. We're able to say, hey, that's our base, so we get to go 1.15, get that 100% original, that 0.65, multiply it by an additional 15%, and we gain almost 7.5% of our stamina or Magicka back on fully charged heavy attack. So we're getting almost 1% additional stamina or Magicka when we complete those fully charged heavy attacks. That's why Tenacity is nice. There's no really other source of resource management for stamina bars in here, which is why we go 100 in Tenacity. Alright, and then blue CP, and this is where things change depending on what you're doing. So if you're the Rapid Strikes player who's doing Maelstrom rotation, or you're using Rapid Strikes instead of Surprise Attack because you have access to Major Fracture elsewhere, then this is going to be what you're going to use. You're going to have 28 into Master at Arms. This is because this will apply to light attacks, heavy attacks, and direct damage abilities, so doing our Execute or something of the sort, or the first hit of Poison Injection or Trap Beast, that's all direct damage. So we're going to have 28. We're not going to have any into Physical Expert because our weaving damage is only about 16% of our DPS, so that's pretty small, and Master at Arms already buffs that, so there's no advantage to put this in there. Now, if you're a heavy attack player and you're not keen on doing a full rotation and you can't sustain that, then you're going to want to take points elsewhere and put them into Physical Weapon Expert. Just remember, make sure you're on a full percent integer. If you are not, then it's going to round down, so be as close to that integer as possible. Then we're going to have 66 into Thaumaturge. This is because almost all of our damage is dots. Rapid Strikes, the dot from Poison Injections, Endless Hail is a dot, Caltrops is a dot. All of it. Our ultimates like Rend or Ballista, they're all dots. So Thaumaturge is like about 60 to 70% of our DPS is damage over time with the Rapid Strikes build. That's why we have so much spent into Thaumaturge. Then we're going to have 64 into Mighty. This just gives us 13% damage across the board. It's really helpful because it applies to everything. We're going to have 0 into Piercing, and that's because we're going to be at armor penetration cap with just a few things. So Major Fracture, 5k. Twin Fang Snake, 5k. Sharpened, 5k. So we're at 15k, over 15k, closer to 15.5k just from those three things. Then when we start to get things like Infused Crusher enchant, that's almost another 2k. We have Power of the Light or Breach Poisons, that's another 1320. If we have Night Mothers, that's minus 2580. So there are tons and tons of sources that reduce that armor value of a boss, which they have 18,200, so 18,200. So we're at 15k just with ourselves with Fracture, Breach, with Fracture, Twin Fang, and Sharpened Weapons. So only 3k penetration is needed, which you're going to get from your group mates more times than not. That's why we have 0 points spent in here. Now, again, if you don't have Twin Fang and you're not running in a group who's capable of putting all these things up, you're going to want to take points out of Thaumaturge and Precise Strikes and buff up Piercing because, again, you don't have armor penetration cap. But most people who are in a decent enough group who have a grasp of what they're doing, so applying that Major Fracture, maybe doing a Power of the Light or a Breach Poison, using an Infused Crusher enchant, running Alkosh, Night Mothers. A lot of these sets are ran in the game, and while you might not have access to them 100% of the time, it's still better off to put 0 into piercing unless you're a solo player, you don't have all of it yet. So then you're going to want to put a little bit into piercing. Then we're going to do 52 into precise strikes. This just gives us 19% additional damage when we critically hit. Guess what? We're going to be critting a lot. So this makes our crits even stronger, really straightforward. Again, if you're not 100% positive that you're able to do this rotation, then take points on Thaumaturge, maybe go down to 19%, take points out of Precise Strikes, maybe go down to 15%, and then buff up that Physical Weapon Expert and Master at Arms so you can buff up those heavy attacks if you're using that instead of a Spammable or something. Alright, and then our other deviation is if we're the solo player, instead of using Rapid Strikes, then instead of running 64 into Mighty, we're going to run 56. 56. Again, you can check all of this on my written guide at Deltia's Gaming, so don't worry if you don't remember these. Then our Master at Arms is going to go from 28 to 37. This is because that surprise attack is direct damage instead of Rapid Strikes. Since we're using that, it's more important to have some of that. Then our Precise Strikes is going to go from 52 to 56 because crit chance is really important. And then our Thaumaturge is going to go from 66 to 61 because we're losing some of our dot damage. But we still have a lot of dots. Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Rending Slashes, Blade Cloak, all of these things. So those are the numbers for that. Hopefully this has given you an idea. Again, this is if you're in Twin Fang Snake, Sharpened Weapons, and so on. So if you're not in those things, you need to make an informed choice. Understand, how close am I to armor penetration? Add up Major Fracture, because that's probably going to be applied. Add up maybe if you're wearing Night Mothers, 2580. If you're using Sharpened Weapons, that's another 5160. Just add up the numbers, subtract it from the 18200, and see how much you're missing, and then just start pumping up points into piercing and moving away. Just remember, make sure you're on those full point integers. But that covers pretty much everything with the Stamina Nightblade. This was a long video because there was a lot to talk about with what we changed, and I wanted to make sure all of it was in. The solo player, the group player, average player, etc. So thanks for sticking it with me if you have. But other than that, if you have questions, leave a comment below or go to my official forums post and comment there, or comment on the written guide at Deltia's Gaming. I love answering questions. I want to see you guys do better with the game, have fun in the game, because that's what it's all about. It's a game. We're here to have fun, and the game makes it really hard to do that. So I just want to make sure that I can help that sort of situation along the line. But that'll be it with this video. Next, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. Probably Magic and Nightblade. I'll still be updating written guides at Deltia's Gaming and occasionally posting them on my official forums page. Most of it's going to be on Deltia's. And again, answer questions all the time. Hit me up on Twitter, YouTube comments, the forums, wherever. Just ask me a question. As long as I haven't answered it 20 times that day, more times than not, I will respond to you. But until then, I will see you guys next time. If you've liked the content in this video, consider pledging at my Patreon. The community's interest and support ensure that I can keep making content as well as looking for ways to improve. To those who already have, I truly appreciate all the support, discussion, and encouragement you all give. You are amazing. If you have feedback for this video, drop a comment below, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or subscribe to the channel. Other than that, I will see you guys next time.